Revelation chapter 12 is approximately in the middle of the tribulation period. We're going to start with verses 1 and 2. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. This is the great wonder in heaven that Revelation 12 talks about. The woman, clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, with a crown of 12 stars, travailing to give birth. Now, for those of you who don't know, the planets were known as wandering stars back then. They did not know they were planets. This happens on September 23rd, 2017. And it only happens for about 12 hours. From the time the moon gets underneath her feet till the time it's in the next constellation, there's a 12-hour period. And this does not happen again. I have gone forward 1,000 years, and this does not happen again. There are other people online who I've talked to who have gone a few thousand years in either direction, and it does not happen again. So this is just a one-time event. Leo has 9 stars in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. During this time only do you get these 3 lined up in this perfect line, where if you draw through this, that puts a crown right on top of her head. Verses 1 and 2 were found by someone else a couple of years ago. What follows is what I believe verses 3 through 5 is. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God, and to his throne. Verse 6 is not included with the rest of this because this is not in the heavens anymore. At this point, it's specifically talking about Israel fleeing into the wilderness. The first thing we need to do is figure out who the great red dragon is. We get a clue as to how to find him in verse 4. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered. In Strong's numbers, the great red dragon can also be known as the fire-colored dragon. As you can see here, I've gone ahead 16 days from the Revelation 12 verse 1 and 2 sign to show that Jupiter is right next to being born. Let's see if we can find a fiery dragon standing right before the woman as she's about to give birth. Maybe this might help. Fiery dragon standing right before the woman as she's about to give birth. The last part that we see in the heavens is verse 5. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. For the last part of this prophecy, we're going to pay attention to Mercury and how Mercury interacts with Jupiter. We're going to watch Mercury come by and snatch up the child and take him to God's throne. And here he takes him to God's throne. Now that happens in the constellation of Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is one of only 13 constellations that cross our ecliptic. You know all the rest is the 12 signs in the zodiac: Sagittarius, Scorpio, Libra. Ophiuchus is the only other one that crosses, and it only does so right here at this one little point. So where this is taken up to God's throne is not a coincidence. There are a few websites online that make a connection between Ophiuchus and the throne of God. They're saying that Revelation chapter 22 verses 1 through 3 is also a sign in the heavens, and they connect the throne of God, the sign of Ophiuchus, as being there. The rest of the prophecy in Revelation chapter 12 we have to figure out. We have to figure out if the 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns fit with the fiery dragon. We also have to find out if his tail draws down a 3rd part of the stars of heaven and casts them to the earth. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. Let's take a look at the 7 heads and the 7 crowns. But first, let's run over and see what else it says about these 7 heads. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Here are the heads of the fiery dragon. Pluto would have been over here, but in 2006, Pluto fell from being a head, so it's not included. That leaves 8 heads of the fiery dragon. We need to take one of these out, and that's going to be the Earth. And we're going to take it out for 3 reasons. First of all, it's where we view everything from. We're standing on it. We don't see it in the heavens because it's under our feet. We see the rest of the 7 in the heavens. Another reason why we don't use it is because Earth does not wear a crown. All the rest of these wear a crown, and we'll get into that in just a minute. The third reason is because Earth does not have a blasphemous name. The rest of the 7 all have blasphemous names. They're named after gods or a goddess. There is one God. Anything else is blasphemy. So all of these names, all of the 7 names, are blasphemous. Now the crowns that Earth does not wear, we get from those names. All of these were gods or goddess. They wore crowns. Mercury was not just the messenger of the gods. He was a god out of a group of gods. He wore a crown. Venus was the goddess of love. She wore a crown. Mars was the god of war. Jupiter was the god of gods. Saturn was the god of time and many other things. Uranus was the god of the sky. Neptune was the god of the sea. They all wore crowns. They're all blasphemous names, and Earth is not included because Earth isn't named after a god. It doesn't have a blasphemous name, and it's where we view everything from. The 10 horns are mentioned 10 times in the Bible, twice in Revelation 13:1. Whenever the heads and horns are mentioned, it never says the horns are on those 7 heads. Although 7 of the horns do come from the 7 heads, 3 of them do not. 3 of them are only found on the dragon. The 10 horns are the next 10 biggest things in our solar system after the planets, but they are in 2 groups. The next 7 biggest things in our solar system are the 7 major moons in our system. Ganymede, Io, Callisto, and Europa are all from Jupiter. We have our moon from Earth. Titan is from Saturn, and Triton is from Neptune. Pluto is on here to show you the size of Pluto, that it's actually the size of a moon. After the 7 moons, the next 3 largest objects in our solar system are dwarf planets. These next 3, Eris, Pluto, and Makemake, round out the top 10 horns. Haumea is included in that he is talked about in Daniel chapter 7, verse 20. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, I believe that to be Haumea, and before whom 3 fell. Before Haumea, these 3 have to fall somehow. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union took Pluto away from being a planet. They demoted him. He fell, and when he fell, he took all the rest of them with him. Let's take a look at some of the descriptions of the little horn in Daniel chapter 7. Verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Verse 20, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And verse 24, and the 10 horns out of the kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, shall subdue 3 kings. The reason we have so much information on Haumea is to let us know what the 10 horns are. They're the next 10 biggest things in our solar system after the planets, and they are right before him. He divides these from the little stuff below it. Before I go into this next part, I need to warn you, it's very strange. I'm not sure if this fits or not, but there's so much coincidence involved with it that I need to show it to you. And behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man. So these are the biggest of the horns. What would be eyes on the horns? Could it be the moons? And the reason I ask is Haumea is the only one that has 2. All the rest of them have 1 or none, or Pluto actually has 5, they're only showing 3 here, but Haumea is the only one that has 2, like the eyes of a man. Also on this horn is a mouth, and a mouth. This is an artist's rendering of Haumea. Astronomers are detecting a red area on it. Is that a mouth? In verse 20, it says, whose look was more stout than his fellows. Is his look more stout than his fellows? Verse 24, 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first referring to the 10 kings. This is what Haumea looks like in space. It looks like a football that's tumbling. He's more diverse than the rest of them. So he has 2 eyes like the eyes of a man. He has a mouth. He's more stout than his fellows. He's more diverse than the rest. And the only reason we went so far into this guy is because he shows us who the other 10 horns are that we're looking for, because 3 before him fell. Now the other 7 above these, they didn't fall. As an extra clue in the Bible that we can divide the horns into 2 groups of 3 and 7, the 10 horns are mentioned 10 times in the Bible, 3 times in Daniel, and 7 times in the book of Revelation. As an extra clue that we can divide up the horns into 2 groups, there are 7 sevens in everything we've talked about. There are the 7 heads, the 7 crowns, and the 7 blasphemous names. There are the 7 horns that didn't fall, that's the 7 moons. 7 times the 10 horns are mentioned or referenced in the book of Revelation. There are 7 times the 7 heads are mentioned or referenced in the book of Revelation. And only in the 7th chapter of Daniel do we find the 10 horns. If we take out the 7 moons, we're only going to have 6 sevens. Let's go to the last part of the prophecy that we haven't touched on yet. Verse 4, and his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. This is the earth as it travels around the sun. However, when we look at the sun, we don't see it here. We see it against the background stars. So on March 21st, when the earth is here, we see the sun in Pisces on March 21st. As the fiery dragon travels through the 12 constellations of the ecliptic, he divides the heavens into 3 parts. He divides it into the part that he travels through, and he divides it from the heavens above and the heavens below. As the fiery dragon passes through the constellations and moves to the next one, he is casting the stars out. And 6 months later, when he is on the other side, the earth is going through those stars. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven,